So good morning, everyone. This is our COVID vaccine Q&A with Shannon O. McNamara. Is that Dr. McNamara?
That's correct, yeah.
Dr. McNamara. As I said, in addition to being a fabulous playwright, Dr. McNamara is an emergency room physician. So Dr. McNamara, why don't you do your intro that you were just about to do before I interrupted you?
Sure. So I have been working as an emergency physician since 2014 and have been, or I started my residency in 2011, so about 10 years ago. And have been in New York working in the ER for 6 years. In the last year, COVID has really taken off as one of the main things going on. And so much of my practice has shifted towards that in various ways. And right now, as the vaccine comes out, things are changing really rapidly. A lot of people have questions. And so I wanted to offer whatever expertise I could to our community. So I put together a little presentation and I think it would be helpful to talk about, my perspective and what I've been doing for the last year and kind of what I know about and what I don't know about. Talk a little bit about, the efficacy of the vaccines. I think that the numbers get thrown around a lot on TV, and just talking about what that means. Talking a little bit about how they work from a scientific perspective, then talking about the logistics of actually getting a vaccine, and then answering any questions you have. And I put together a handout of just various resources that you can reference as far as scheduling and more information and that kind of thing. This is a picture of Sandra Lindsay, who's a critical care nurse in New York, who was the first person in America to get the vaccine outside of a clinical trial, which was pretty cool. Before I get started, are there any important things that you'd really like for me to cover today so that I can make sure I put those in?
Sounds like you've got it covered.
All right. This is a picture of a random ER, but this is what my work life has been pre-COVID, post-COVID. So, when COVID hit in March, things changed pretty much overnight, and the ER started receiving COVID patients. And at the end of March, almost everybody we saw in the ER had COVID, whether they were there for COVID or not. This posed a challenge for me since I was pregnant with Ronan, who is now healthy and bubbly and a baby. But in March, we really didn't know, what was the effect of COVID on pregnancy. We know that pregnant women can get sicker with normal viruses. So I was pretty worried about my own risk. And after working a shift dressed like this, I worked my last shift in the ER near the end of March, and then I switched to a full-time telemedicine practice. So I was home from March till Ronan was born doing telemed on the computer. So I was seeing actually a lot of COVID patients and talking to people at home that had COVID, while my colleagues in the ER were, going through shifts like this with full personal protective equipment, just because there was so much COVID. And it was a really hard time. In March and April, we saw a lot of sick people with COVID, and it's estimated that about 1 million people in the New York area had COVID during that time. Testing was really limited at that time, so we don't have good numbers, but from what we can guess, it was about 1 million. Unfortunately, our family got COVID at the end of March. So my spouse, Sean, had COVID, luckily recovered well at home, and the rest of us were okay, but we don't really know who had it since we couldn't do testing. So this is something that, I've been thinking about and engaging with for a long time. And I know a lot about kind of the outpatient management, less about what's been happening in the hospital since I haven't been there in a while, though I keep tabs on that. And I've been home with the baby, so I haven't been practicing clinically right now. But I think, the vaccine coming out has been a huge game changer. We're Healthcare professionals are so excited to have more protection. You see everybody here is wearing gowns and hats and masks and sometimes multiple masks and a face shield. And COVID is just really, really contagious. And it's been very frustrating to keep it under control. And the vaccine offers so much protection, largely from getting sick, but also we hope from spreading it. So, the way out of this pandemic is that the vaccines really help us get there. So I am planning to go back to work in a few weeks. So I received the vaccine in the last month or so. So I went and got the Pfizer vaccine, which was what was being offered at my workplace, finished both shots and feeling good, and am looking forward to going back to doing clinical work. A lot of people ask about side effects. I did have a fair amount of side effects with the second vaccine, which is very frequent. The first vaccine gave me a sore arm, then I was fine. The second one, I felt tired, and then about 36 hours afterwards, kind of day 2, I felt really flu-like I had a lot of body aches and chills and sore joints. And I was kind of expecting that, since we know that that can happen, and that's the feeling of the immune system responding to the vaccine the way it should. And I took some Tylenol and some ibuprofen, and I felt better, and it went away. So that's very typical and what's expected. But I think the overall point of my story is that this has been a very hard year for healthcare professionals. A lot of my colleagues got COVID. PPE that we wear can help only so much, and the vaccine is kind of the ultimate PPE, which we're really excited about. So do the vaccines work? I think this is a big question that we were all wondering before they came out. How good are these? Are they going to help? These are 2 graphs for Pfizer and Moderna, which healthcare professionals have been really excited about. So the bottom line is they do work really well. These are graphs in the line that's sloping up is the number of people that got COVID over time that didn't get a vaccine. So to test them out, they took 2 groups. One got the COVID vaccine, one didn't. Both were tested in a large amount of people. So I think about 40,000 for Pfizer. I'm not sure for Moderna, but a lot of people have been tested with this vaccine, and all volunteers. And as you see the one line going up, that's just how much COVID people got over time without being vaccinated. And then the line that flattens out is the people that got vaccinated. So we see this huge difference where we really see the vaccine making a difference. It's expected that more and more people will get COVID, but then with the vaccine, it really flattens out. And that shows that it works quite well. So for both the Pfizer and Moderna, which are mRNA vaccines, those were about 95%. They showed 95% efficacy, which is really just a number that says, what's the difference between people that got the vaccine and didn't in this one trial? So in real life, those numbers might be a little different, but it made a huge difference. The other one that's coming out now is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. This one has not yet been approved by the FDA, but the data is coming out this week, so I anticipate it will be approved soon. This one, the headlines are talking about the efficacy, which you see kind of over on the right, being more in the 60 to 70% range, which is true. But I think the most important thing we care about is how much did this prevent people getting really sick from COVID or dying from COVID? And after my screen moved over, but after 40, however many days that is, so about 2 months after the vaccine, it was 100% effective, where no one got seriously ill and no one died. So that for me is the take home with this Johnson & Johnson vaccine, where it's very good at preventing severe disease and death, which are the biggest things that we care about. And the value of the Johnson & Johnson one is it's one shot and it can go in a regular freezer. The other 2 are much more sensitive, and they're 2 shots and frozen at very, very low temperatures. So they're a little bit harder to ship and harder to get out. So if, adding this vaccine to the mix would mean that more people could be vaccinated, which would be great. Some people have asked, which vaccine should I get? Which one's better? At this point, we're stuck in this pandemic. It needs to end. We need whatever protection we can get. So my best advice is get whatever vaccine is offered to you. If you are offered a vaccine, get it. And there's a question of, what if I'm offered one that's not as good as another one? I think at this point, anyone is really good. They all provide great coverage from being hospitalized or dying from COVID, which is what we care about. And this is not the end of the story. There will be booster vaccines. There will be new vaccines. So if you are offered the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and you think, oh, well, this one might be not as effective, I would anticipate that they're going to add to that efficacy. So, it's the best vaccine is the one you can get right now. And we're going to keep learning more about this and fine tuning how we make them, how people can access them, and how good they are. So this is all really exciting data where we can actually prevent severe illness and death from COVID with any of these vaccines. So I can talk a little bit about the nerdy science that goes into how they work, but I just wanted to check in and see what questions people may have at this point about what I've talked about so far. Go ahead. Bridget, could you help me moderate just because I can't actually see, my mouse isn't working with the PowerPoint on.
I'm asking people to unmute. So if
I would like to ask why it's so difficult to get a vaccine. I managed to get one for Ken last week, but it's a real frustration.
Absolutely.
I'm younger than Ken, so I was not in the first wave. And my vaccines are not until the end of February, but I'm very frustrated because I have a lot of risk factors, and I just can't, it's
Glenda, I really hear you on that. I think the short answer is, and I'll get into more of the logistics at the end too. The short answer is there aren't enough vaccines right now. The vaccines are produced by the companies, then allocated by the federal government. So the federal government says, okay, New York State, you get this many vaccines. And then within New York State, they split them up. So New York City gets so many, different counties get however many there are. Right now, there are not enough vaccines to meet the demand that is there. So they've been canceling appointments. So New York has been trying to scale up their ability to do vaccines, like opening up the Javits Center and places where they can get a lot of people through. And they've been canceling them because they don't have enough shots right now.
Yeah,
so
you can't get at the Javits Center. I couldn't.
Right. And that's because there aren't enough shots. So currently there are not enough vaccines available to New York City to vaccinate everyone, to fill, like, it's not that there are appointments that aren't getting filled because there are too many people. Right now it's that there aren't enough shots. So we expect the new presidential administration has been working really hard on this, and they just got there. So I think it will take a month or two to see a ramp up, but all the companies are planning to do more vaccines. So I've heard about, I think J&J said they have 100 million. Pfizer has 100 or 200 more million. So their goal is to vaccinate a lot more people, but we just don't have the shots yet. So it's a situation where we kind of have to just hold tight until the vaccines show up and then get them as soon as we can.
I see Mady Ivy has a question.
Yes, I have a couple of things. And would you speak to when the vaccine becomes effective after you get the second shot? I've heard 2 weeks, I've heard a month. And then how long do you think, or do they currently think the vaccine is going to be good for? And what's the answer to the question about whether or not you could still get infected, but not sick, but transmit it to people?
Those are really good questions. I'm going to try to remember them all. And if I miss something, let me know. So when are they effective? So you can see for this, the one shot Johnson & Johnson, they measured it about 50 days. The other one, We think this is after just one dose. So the efficacy kind of, it grows over time. But it's with the 2-shot regimens, they're thinking about 2 to 3 weeks is when you hit your peak efficacy or effectiveness after the second shot. And the third question around, or the next question around when, can you transmit it? Can you get it, not know you have it, feel fine, and then give it to someone else when you're vaccinated? That's a really key question that we don't know the answer to. So in all the trials, they were trying to get it done as fast as they could. So they said, okay, if you get sick, we'll test you. But they did not test people who weren't sick. So we do not know about asymptomatic transmission. We think that it will be better. We think that when you're vaccinated, you're less likely to get it and less likely to transmit it. But we don't know that. So that, you know, I have not changed my behavior at all since being vaccinated. When I go back to work, I'm still going to be very careful with PPE because there is still a risk that I can get it and bring it home to my family. And that risk exists. So we're going to know how long is the immunity going to last? We also don't know. With time, we'll know more. Right now, we know that they work well at the onset. We don't know when they wear off. So these are all questions that I think time will have to help us with, because they're doing a lot more studies and we'll know more once time passes.
Are they following those 35 or 40 people that were in the original test? Are they still following them to see if they are getting infected, or did they stop following them?
That's a good question. I would imagine that they are following them. There are a lot of different studies going on now where, you know, initially they didn't study pregnant and lactating people. Now everybody that's getting vaccinated, they're following. So I think we're going to keep, you know, these were the 2 big studies that had to be done. Every vaccine has to do an initial study to make sure it's safe and effective. And then there's a lot more studies coming out. So I think I would expect to see more and more data as the time passes. You know, they're going to add children. They're going to ask, how long does it last? They're going to ask, what about asymptomatic transmission? These are all really good questions that we just don't know the answers to yet.
There was a headline about some congressman who'd been vaccinated through the second shot. I think that was yesterday or the day before, who's are testing positive for corona.
Yeah. So it's very, you know, the biggest thing that we need in the goal is that we get our community vaccinated to about 75 or 80% of people vaccinated. Then we expect that the amount of COVID is going to drop, because COVID really, it can only live in people. If people can't get it, it'll go away. But when the transmission is high, like it is now, there's still a lot of COVID in the community. It's around. The shot is a great protector for preventing one individual person from getting sick, ending up in the hospital, or dying from COVID, but it doesn't take away all the risk. And so that's why it's a stepwise approach. Getting one person vaccinated is great. Getting more is great. Getting up to 80%, then we think life will change a lot. But right now it's still a waiting game. Would people like to hear about how the vaccines work? I had put together some nerdy science slides, and I'm curious to the degree that is something people are interested. I see Mady shaking her head.
I don't want to know how it works, but I do have questions that are from, I have 30-year-olds, mid 30-year-olds that are looking at pregnancy or pregnant, whatever. So if you could speak to it in the terms of, I've got one couple that are saying, no, we're not taking it because it might affect the man's sperm. I mean, it just goes on and on. Can you the pregnancy, that in light of pregnancy, either before, during, or after?
Yeah, absolutely. So there were rumors going around that COVID affected fertility. Those are not based on any data that we have. There's no reason to expect that these would hurt fertility. As far as pregnancy, so I have a lot of coworkers that are either pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant. They did not test it on pregnant people, so we're getting that data now. There's no reason to think it would cause problems with pregnancy, but obviously it's limited information. So I've talked to a lot of friends who are healthcare workers, who are high risk, who are contemplating pregnancy and or pregnant. It's a conversation that people have with their doctors. What the professional societies say is talk to your doctor about your situation. But in what I've seen is people who are in second, third trimester are getting the vaccine, hoping that it will pass on some immunity to the baby, and also hoping that the parent, because pregnant people are at much higher risk of severe disease, that the parent will be protected, even if there's no immunity passed on to the baby. The big question mark is first trimester, when all that development happens really rapidly. And so I know some people in the first trimester who got the vaccine, and some people who waited till the second trimester, some people who said, I want to get vaccinated before I get pregnant, and then try to get pregnant after I get vaccinated. That's a conversation people have to have with their healthcare provider. But for the most part, we think it was likely safe. There's no evidence yet that it causes any harm, but that it's an individual decision.
Well, I think the concern in connection with how the information that comes out about maybe these two new vaccinations affect your DNA, and that's what.
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about how they work, to give you just a general overview, because that's something that came up and something that I wanted to learn about too. I'm going to talk about both how the mRNA vaccines work and how the DNA, the virus vaccine works. So the main vulnerability is the spike protein. So this red, let me see if I can annotate. My mouse has disappeared, so I can't. So this red thing on the left is what COVID looks like. And on the outside, it's a ball, and it has this spike protein that presents itself. So it's like a pointy little hedgehog. So that is a thing that's the piece that our immune system can recognize and say, wait a second, you don't belong here, get out. So all the vaccines focus on that spike protein and teaching our body to recognize it and neutralize it before it makes us sick. So the Pfizer and Moderna are mRNA vaccines. mRNA is like a recipe for our cells to make the spike protein. So they don't contain virus. You can't get sick from them. The way our bodies make proteins is we take DNA, which is kind of like a cookbook. You take your cookbook, your DNA, then you pull out a recipe, and the cell normally makes RNA and mRNA. That recipe then goes to the cook, and they make the proteins. So these contain, they can't touch the DNA. Your DNA is your DNA, and these vaccines cannot alter it. mRNA is a very sensitive particle, and it kind of disintegrates pretty easily, which is why they're so, these vaccines are so finicky and need to be frozen. So they give your body the mRNA, it goes into the cell. Your cell looks and says, oh, I got this new recipe. Why don't I make this protein that's written on this mRNA? It makes the spike protein, just the spike protein. So it can't make a full virus. It can't make you sick. It just makes that one little protein. The cell shows off the protein, says, oh, I just made this. And then your immune system says, wait a minute, what's up with this? This isn't supposed to be here. Learns what that spike protein is and creates a lot of antibodies for it. So the Pfizer uses the mRNA itself in the vaccine, which is a totally new vaccine technology that's been developed over the last decade. And they were able to use it in this case, which was really exciting. The J&J vaccine is an adenovirus vaccine, which fundamentally does the same thing, just slightly differently. So this is COVID with that spike protein on the outside. And then if this is its DNA, that little red part just talks about the spike protein. So J&J uses the DNA from the virus, but just the spike protein piece, and it puts it in an adenovirus package. So whereas the mRNA comes in a lipid package, this one comes in a viral package. This virus can't make you sick. It can just get into the cell. The trick is just getting in to make it work. So the J&J one, the particle enters the cell. It does bring new DNA into your body. However, this can't get integrated in your DNA. It's just a way for the cell to read it, turn it into mRNA, and then make the protein. So it's only for the spike protein. And the reason they use DNA is because it's hardier than mRNA. mRNA it's gone, poof, too fast, unless you freeze it, deep freeze it, where DNA is hardier, and this vaccine is easier to ship, easier to transport. Then this nerdy science, but mRNA turns into it tells your body how to make a protein. Your body makes the spike protein, puts it out on the outside of the cell. And then for both vaccines, all of them, your immune system sees that protein, attacks it, eats it, and your T cells say, what's this? This is interesting. This is new. They show it to your B cells. Your B cells say, this is interesting. This is new. I'm going to make an antibody for it. And then at the end of the day, the final common pathway is you make antibodies. If a COVID virus shows up, those antibodies stick to it and mark it for destruction. So your body is ready and primed and has been practicing. Is like, all right, I see you, get out of here. And is ready to identify it, neutralize it, you don't get sick. Now, the side effects that I mentioned, often with the second shot for the mRNA vaccines, we'll see what happens with the adenovirus ones. This process of your body saying, what's this new protein? How do I make antibodies against it? How do I destroy it? That doesn't feel great. That feels like having the flu. When people say, oh, well, the flu shot gave me the flu shot can't give you the flu. It makes you learn how to fight the flu, and practicing that doesn't always feel good. But it's not contagious. It's not going to give you the virus. It's not going to put you in the ER or the hospital. So it's important to expect that and recognize it and have some Tylenol or ibuprofen, whatever you over the counter you take on hand to help. But that's expected, and just your body learning how to fight it. So, when I first learned about this, I was wondering, like, what's with these mRNA vaccines are new. This DNA stuff is new. I don't want it to get in my DNA. How does that work? And in reading about them, they expect any side effects from a vaccine to show up within a few months. They've checked thousands and thousands of people have gotten these vaccines. None of them have had major adverse outcomes. There's a few allergic reactions, but they're all treatable. And this technology has been really working well to protect us against the disease. And I've seen what COVID can do to people, and it's really, really terrible. And I'm sure you all, unfortunately, know other folks that have suffered with this. So I'm really excited about these. I think the risks are less than the benefits, and the benefits are tremendous. So that's a little bit about how they work. To answer Mady's question. As far as shifting back into how do you get them? So you can see, so the data is public around how many vaccines are administered. So this was from yesterday. The light blue is how many people total have gotten their first dose. The dark blue is their second dose. So I think my video's over it, but it's a little under 800,000 people have gotten at least one dose. And under 200,000 for the second dose. So we want a lot more than this. You can go to these websites and find out about how many vaccines exist, but we've been running on like a couple days supply. They've been making sure to allocate second doses. So if you get your first dose, you'll definitely get a second dose. But we're going through them really fast, and we need more shots. So that's the next big push. People who are eligible, Glenda, you mentioned, age is a big one, everybody over 65, healthcare workers, and kind of our main essential worker categories, grocery workers, first responders, like police, fire, EMS, teachers, public transit, folks involved with homeless shelters. So if you're in these categories, unfortunately, the process is really messy. It's not centralized. There's a ton of different avenues. And that's why I put together a handout to send you with different links. So a great place to start is your primary care doctor and say, hey, I want to get a vaccine. Do you have access to appointments? Because a lot of the hospitals are allocating them specifically. So Sinai has a bunch of vaccines. NYU has a bunch of vaccines. And they have those generally reserved for their existing patients. And they have a process for allocating them. Then there's just general community sites. The Department of Health is running a bunch of sites, like the Javits Center, which we mentioned is not really running right now because there aren't enough vaccines. There are currently no appointments through the Public Health Agency. This phone number at the bottom is for Department of Health and Hospitals, public hospital vaccine sites. I called it this morning and there are no appointments available. So once we get more vaccines, that would be a way to make an appointment. There's also 2 websites. The New York City Vaccine Finder is run by the Department of Health. They collate all the appointments that they can, but they miss some of them, but that gives you most appointments. And there's 2 on the Upper West Side that are close to us. Then there's the next one is there's this volunteer run New York vaccine one where they try to get even more availability. So every appointment, and you can check that. Both of those aren't showing many appointments available at all. So hopefully over the next few weeks, we'll get more vaccines from the federal government and there'll be more appointments. But for now, it's a crunch.
Can I just say too that what we have is Shannon has put together an information sheet with all this information on it. And I'm going to email that to everybody who's here or anybody else who wants it so that you have all of this stuff at your fingertips, okay? And I think it's also really important to recognize, not in addition to how hard this has been for healthcare workers, I read somewhere like scientists all over the world just sort of stopped what they were doing. Like everybody stopped and said, okay, we got to figure this out. And all the greatest scientific minds all across the world focused for the last 10 months on getting a vaccine together. So this is sort of a worldwide effort. And I think that, as Shannon said, that we can trust that effort. We also need to recognize too, that there was no system in place to distribute vaccines. The Trump administration had nothing in place. So without being too political, we're playing catch up. Right now, the Biden administration has just come in and it has been, I think, in there for 11 days. So we're seeing 11 days effort trying to get this thing organized. So I know that there's a lot of concern and anxiety, but I'm hoping that people can sort of recognize that. And maybe I see your hand, but I want to make sure that other people who haven't had a chance to ask a question get in there too.
And I wanted to add too, before we get to more questions, things are changing very quickly. So I use Twitter to keep things up. And one of the things I put on the list was Mark Levine is a local city council member who covers not where West End Collegiate is, but Upper West Side, West Harlem, and Washington Heights. And there's daily updates. So an update I got recently was that so there's been an equity issue where certain neighborhoods, people are coming in to get the vaccines, but people from the neighborhood aren't getting them. So certain neighborhoods, I'm just trying to pull up exactly which one it is, but near New York.
It's up by Columbia Presbyterian and the Armory. That's where it was set up for Latinos, and the whites came in and got the vaccine.
So there are a list as of now. If you live in certain neighborhoods in the Bronx, some in Harlem, and some in Inwood and Washington Heights, folks who qualify can walk into the Armory and get a vaccine without an appointment if they live in those zip codes. So I have those zip codes. I found that out yesterday. So these things are changing really, really fast. And I'm happy to be a resource as they do. And if you have questions about those neighborhoods, I'm happy to share those zip codes. But they're going to keep changing fast, especially as we get more vaccines.
On NewYorkCity.gov, there's a list of high schools where you can go. You don't need an appointment where they're giving the vaccine. One, Adelaide Stevenson, they've been doing it for 10 days.
Oh, that's
but they
great.
don't advertise it, and you don't know about it unless it's word of mouth. You know, I happen to get the vaccine. My primary care doctor called me and asked me if I had gotten it. Did I want it? I said no, and she sent me to the site to get
Oh, that's fantastic. That's
the
great.
vaccine. But I had spent hours trying to get an appointment, which I was never able to get.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ms. Ruby. I see Mady Ivy's been waiting to say something. Go ahead.
Could you just speak to what your perspective is on why healthcare workers and nursing home staffs, which I view as healthcare workers, seem to be, running in what, the 60% at the most of people accepting the vaccine I have a sister-in-law in Texas who has immune compromised. She's takes immune suppressant injections every week. We took the risk and got her vaccinated, and she's had no adverse response so far. But it was so why are healthcare workers? Well, I know that the hospitals have the vaccine to give to healthcare workers. Why aren't they taking it?
So I think that it's a good question. Most healthcare workers are taking it. There are people who are hesitant, and I think there's a couple different factors with vaccine hesitancy. One, some people are always going to be worried about something new, and this is very new. And there's a certain amount of people who say, let's let other people get it first, and then I'll get it later. I just want to make sure that this is new. I'm a little nervous about it. There's issues with distrust of the healthcare system, which, I have to acknowledge is very realistic. We've all been disappointed in ways that things haven't worked out ideally. So, there maybe wasn't enough PPE, and there were recommendations of treatments that didn't work. And unfortunately, with the last administration, I stopped trusting the information from the CDC because I knew a lot of it wasn't true. Where they said, oh, it's safe to send your kids back to school, go ahead. And I said, wait a second, I don't think you have the data for that. So there's some major trust issues that are very real. I think folks, the things that we've found that help people get over that hesitancy is, knowing someone that got the vaccine and said, hey, I got it, I'm doing okay. That makes it less scary. Learning more information and busting myths. Some people think, oh, well, there's live virus in it, you could get sick from it. That's not been shown, or there is no live virus, so you can't get COVID from the vaccine. Can it mess with your DNA? That's something a lot of people want to ask about. These genetic vaccines are new, and it's good to ask questions about that. And we don't see any evidence that it will interact with your DNA. People worry about fertility, people worry about pregnancy. I think anything, this is so new, there is always some uncertainty. That's true. There is always some risk. That's true. But based on what we know right now, the vaccine is much safer than COVID and worth the small risk that is there. What I was hesitant at first because, when they say things like, oh, Operation Warp Speed, and we're going to get it out really fast. Like, well, are they doing a good job? And I, went back and looked at presentations from people I did trust, like Dr. Fauci, and like doctors invested in creating the vaccines. And they said, listen, we made these mRNA vaccines in January. So the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines got made all the way back in January, and they've just been testing them. And the degree of testing is just waiting time. You have to get the vaccine to 40,000 people, and then you have to wait a certain amount of time till so many of them get COVID, and then compare them. And they, when I look at the data, I say, okay, well, they did their due diligence. They really did try. And I've talked to people who've gotten the vaccine, so I feel more comfortable. But a lot of people's hesitancy is very reasonable, which is why I wanted to do a session like this because I think it's important to have these conversations and acknowledge that uncertainty is there. We don't know everything yet. We're still learning. But from what we do know, it seems like a good idea right now.
And it also, I mean, again, we have not had a coordinated, consistent response from the top of government. So we just recently saw they were trying to distribute vaccines, I think in Texas, and a group of people showed up and prevented that from happening because
in LA.
In LA, right? Just, you know, people who are anti-vaxxers, people who feel like vaccines are problematic in general, without any real scientific basis for that theory. And then there's also the political issue as well. People have taken COVID-19 and mask wearing and the vaccine and have decided that there's a political aspect to this, that there's some sort of infringement on personal freedoms or something and so we have a whole segment of the population which is going to make it more difficult. It's going to make things last longer because there are people who are going to be actively working against us getting everyone vaccinated.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. I think there's a degree of conspiracy theory fringe element, and also I think a degree of violence that we're not always acknowledging where, you know, the facts are this virus is killing a lot of people, hurting a lot of people. It's doing a lot of harm. We know it's doing more harm in Black communities, in Latino communities, and that is a huge problem. And any conversation needs to start with that problem of acknowledging the harm. And then there are some people who will say, you know, I'm still a little bit nervous. I'm just going to wait it out. I get that. Everybody, this is a new thing. It's okay for people to make the right choice for them. But there are coordinated responses that are not acknowledging the reality and preventing people who want vaccines from getting vaccines. And spreading lies about what we know. And that is violent. And unfortunately, a lot of that is rooted in white supremacy and rooted in really, really, frankly, evil ideologies. And that is dangerous. But what I appreciate about our community is that we can have conversations that say, okay, we're acknowledging the harm from COVID that exists. And we're asking hard questions like, is this safe? What do we know? What don't we know? Those conversations are really important and we need to keep having those conversations. But I think we also need to be mindful that we're starting with the facts that we do share and jumping off from that to have those challenging conversations around what the best thing to do is and what's right and what we know, what we don't know.
Go ahead, Susan. Hold on, you're muted.
I'm having some trouble hearing Susan.
Yes.
Is anybody else having trouble?
Your audio is not coming through well. Why don't you put it in the chat? Is there some, can you put it into the chat window?
Well, I was following Moderna from an investment standpoint before January. And I periodically have investment calls with the, you know, chief executive and so forth. And it is phenomenal. And they are working very, very hard to develop a booster, which will help protect us against the South African and other strands. But they're also working on developing other kinds of vaccines using this technology. It's kind of a major breakthrough in vaccination technology, period.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think the mRNA vaccines are new, but they didn't just appear magically out of thin air. They've been working on this for a long time. And this is really exciting technology that we can use for a lot of things. You know, when we talk about, you know, wouldn't it be great to have a cure for the common cold? That's fundamentally what we're trying to do. And that's really hard. And this is very exciting technology that's out right now.
Can I just say Susan's question says, patients who have been in the hospital for other treatment have not been vaccinated. She's curious why they can't get the vaccine as an inpatient.
Susan, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'll be honest with you. I think that would be kind of a hospital by hospital, how they're deciding their allocation. I know folks that have had COVID and have received certain treatments like monoclonal antibodies do need to wait 3 months before they get vaccinated. Folks that have COVID but didn't receive those treatments can still be vaccinated in kind of a regular timeline. And that would probably be a case by case for patients in those hospitals. Is it safe to vaccinate them? And then the hospitals, what's their allocation priority?
So we're almost, we're a little bit out of time. So
do you mind if I make a 1 minute thing about the new variants?
Sure. Let's have, this will be the closing remarks. Okay, go ahead.
We're at a very critical point right now. The new variants are very contagious. They are here. This is a different situation than we were in March. We need to be very cautious right now. You need to wear double masks. So you want to wear a medical grade mask with a cloth mask over it if you're indoors with other people. Forget 6 feet. When you're indoors with other people, you're sharing the same air. It's very contagious. So get a vaccine if and when you can. Avoid any indoor shared space if you can't. You know, we're going to come out of this, but we're at a critical point where not enough people are vaccinated. There's not enough vaccines, and there's a lot of really contagious virus around. So we got to hold tight. It's rough, but we're going to get through this.
Can you say something just really quick about the mask? If you have like a cloth mask that's got like the little slot to put a filter in, is that enough?
That's good. But for shared indoor activity for adults, I would recommend using a surgical mask or a KN95 with a cloth mask over it, just because the full filter kind of covers your whole face.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. McNamara.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting me talk to you. It's so good to see your faces.
Thank you so much. This talk is going to be on our website, and I have everyone's email address. I'm going to send you the fact sheet that Shannon has put together, which contains information for this.
Bridget, if you want to CC me on that email, if people have follow-up questions, you're welcome to email me. With the little children, it may take me a week to get back to you, but I will do my best.
I will certainly do that. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you in service.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.